So let's talk about auditing in SQL Server or security auditing. So we'll start by going to right-clicking on our server and going to properties. And in our server properties under security, we have our login auditing right here. Defaults to failed logins only. We can change that to none successful logins or both failed and successful. Now, this just audits logging or login, and it logs to. If we go to the management and SQL Server logs, it writes to these logs here, and you can see them by time. We can also open up our current log, and we can see. Let me switch our or sort by our source here, and you'll see some logins. And I created a couple of failed logins yesterday just so that we'd have something in here that we could look at. So here we see a failed login. Now these are standard SQL Server logs, but as far as security login, it's only doing those logins. Now we do have other ways of logging, and that is by creating an audit. So in our security group, we have audits and then audit specifications. And by default, there are no audits or audit specifications. We have to create our own. So I'm going to right click and create a new audit. And this can handle a lot more than just login auditing. But just for kicks, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to give it a name, login auditing. We have a delay. We have what to do on audit log failure. Do we continue? Do we fail the operation or do we just shut down the server? And then we can choose a destination. So we can do it to a file, to the security log, or to the application log. Now, wherever you're writing to, you need to make sure that you have permissions, that the SQL account has permissions to write to that log. So in this case, I'm going to do it to a file because I haven't gone through and given permissions to my SQL Server account to be able to write to the security log or the event log. So what I did is I created a file on the C drive. I created a file called audits, and I'm just going to use that. So I'm going to set my path to C:" audits. Now, an advantage of doing it this way over doing it in the application log or the security log is it kind of isolates these in one particular location. Now that can be a good thing or a bad thing, right? If you're not looking at this location, it may be a bad thing. But on the other hand, if I write these logs to this specific location, then I end up with a log file that's just those things. And so I'm not looking at my Windows event logs and trying to filter out my SQL login auditing or whatever I'm auditing from the myriad of other things that are in there. So once we set the location, we also need to set the file limit. So maximum number of rollover files. I can either set it unlimited or set a maximum number of files. Be aware that if you set it for unlimited, it will consume more and more disk space until it finally crashes your system if you don't clean them out occasionally. And then we can also set a maximum file size. So I'm going to set this, let's do a maximum of 10 megabytes in a file, and then it can roll over. And then I can tell it to reserve disk space if I need it to. I don't. So I'm going to hit OK. And that will create my login auditing audit. Now, notice I didn't tell it what to audit there. I just told it this is the audit that you will use. Now, this is not enabled by default. We see that from the little red X. So we can right click and enable successful. Okay, now we have our audit enabled. But we're not actually auditing anything yet. We set that under our server audit specifications. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to do a new server audit specifications. I'm going to name this login auditing. And then I'm going to set the audit that I want to use it right to. Now this kind of sounds weird. Think of it as the audit defines the location and where we're going to store it. The specification defines what we're going to write there. So here's where I can put in all of the different types of actions I want to audit. So I'm going to hit my little drop down and I'm going to do my failed login group. And then I'm going to do another one for my successful login group. There we go. Now, just for kicks, I'm not actually going to add one here, but if you look at this, you'll see there are a lot of different things that we can audit. And then some of them will be able to set an object schema that we want to audit, or an object name, or a principal name. We can get pretty precise with our auditing here if we want. Once we're done, we just hit OK, and that creates our auditing. And notice again, not enabled. So I want to enable my audit specification. Okay, now I have it. So I have login auditing, my specification, and then my location up here. I can right click and view my audit logs, which there's not really going to be a whole lot here. We just started it. But you can see we have a couple of audit session change. We've got a couple of logins that we've recorded that were successful. And now we can view this audit log whenever and see what's going on our system. Now, this was just login auditing. But as you saw, we can set this to audit a whole myriad of different actions. Now, a couple of things to be aware of when you audit, because one of the temptations is, let's audit everything. That can eat up a lot of disk space, and it can create problems. And then, some people will get really excited and say, hey, if we can't audit something, let's just shut down the server so nothing ever happens when we. And then what happens is their server shuts down when they weren't expecting it because they filled up their audit logs because they were auditing everything under the sun. The other issue with that, by the way, is as you do your auditing, the more things you audit, the more things you have to dig through to find valid information. So, best rule of thumb, pick what you need to audit, only audit that, don't audit everything else. Have a targeted strategic plan for your auditing. And now you know how to implement the plan.